So for this very important session, I think, so what was the background of talking about stigmatizing? So this was a conversation that I had with Elena. So she told me, don't stigmatize us. I said, why should I do? And I said, do you need that? And that's the question that we will now raise to the audience and to us. And the audience will be introduced by Antoinette, please.
Thank you, Christian. As you may know, I'm a basic scientist. And of course, if I want to do research, I need to raise money. That's how it is. And I have to compete with other researchers who are studying HIV, cancer, lots of very serious conditions. And then when I'm asking for a grant and I say I want to study migraine or headache, sometimes I really have to justify this is a severe condition and I need money, we should investigate the problem further. And for that, I'm very happy with the global burden disease studies that really can say that the WHO ranks migraine amongst the most disabling conditions. And of course, whenever I have an interview with a grant agency, I'm starting my presentation like that, making clear that migraine is a very serious disorder. We need to invest in it. And then, yeah, Christian was talking to Elena. I was also talking to Elena. And probably she tells the same things to several patients, people, because she said, no, don't stigmatize us. We migraine patients, we are not invalidated and we can function very well. And first I thought, don't do this, because if I have to go to a grant funding agency, I need my story. And then we were discussing further during a very pleasant lunch and thinking about this session, and we thought, in fact, it's a very interesting topic, how we look upon the stigmatization of migraine patients or not. So without further ado, Elena Ruiz-Torres, I would like to give the floor to you.
Thank you.
We sit down.
We sit down and
listen.
We sit down and wait what happens.
Yeah.
You sit down here. And Paolo, you are missing. You need to come up in a moment, now or after. I don't know if I know how to do this. Okay. Okay, so that was my question, and that was my debate with Marie Antoinette. She needs stigmatization, and we don't want stigmatization. So we were in that lunch discussing whether it's good or not to have stigmatization. And I have been doing some research on that. I cannot be here and then move this. Whether we needed it or not, and whether it was necessary or not. It depends to whom. So I did some research. There's some papers written about stigmatization, but none of those papers give a solution to the stigma issue. And I think it's a very important problem to tackle. So I'm going to open this box today to create a discussion. This is the first day we are going to start with this project. We will work during the whole 2023 with the stigmatization issue. But let me tell you a little bit how some examples and how I started with working with migraine and how do I see the stigmatization. I started advocating in 2005 when the first triptans appeared, and when I was working at that time for the president of the region of Spain, where I live in Valencia, so you will be there all next year. But I was working at that time for that president, and I founded the Spanish Patient Association, and one of my colleagues said to me, "What are you doing with that? What are you creating?" And I said, "The Patient Association for Migraine and Headache." And he said to me, oh my gosh, whatever day we will see the patient association even for constipation. But he said that to me like, what silly thing are you doing now? What stupid thing? We could do constipation too, or something like that. I was looking at him thinking that, aren't you stupid? I suffer migraine, for me it's so important, and you think that it's the same as just constipation? So I realized how difficult it was to be understood by others when I was brave enough to say for my first time that I was going to work on migraine, that I had never said it before. In fact, I said always that I had jaquecas in Spanish, not migraine. Migraine was globalized and was started to be said at that time. Then, on 2005, I came to Vienna. I was in a public day like this, and someone from the public approached me and said, are you going to open the Patient Association in Spain? I said, yes. That was on a Tuesday, and he said, would you like to come to Vienna on Friday? There is a Patient Association meeting there. And I always say yes, I am very energetic. So I said, oh, of course. The first time that someone invites me to come to Vienna, it was not my boyfriend or not my husband or any relative. So I said, of course, yes, I will. And on Friday, I saw myself in a plane flying over Barcelona. And when I was there, I was like, am I crazy? That is the first time I realized that I myself had stigmatized my own disease. And then I said to myself, am I crazy to be in a plane going to a meeting with other patients with headache, with this headache that I have? Isn't this stupid? And am I a stupid one? What am I going to do in Vienna now with some people that I don't know, and what's this? I came here, I met them. There were other patient associations. It was Migrant Trust there. They were celebrating at that time their 50th anniversary. And I was astonished looking at them. I didn't even know what could be done for a patient association or in a patient association. So I met the Finnish association, the Serbian association. There were not very many, but the 10 of them that existed at that time were there. And they were exchanging best practices, telling us what they did at that moment, what could be done, and so on. And I was amazed with such an important job that they did. And that day changed my life. That day I decided that I had to do exactly the same for my Spanish people. In fact, I did it for my Spanish people until I was involved at the European team. But that was an important moment for me, Vienna that moment, and Vienna today, because today I'm also going to propose you something. By the way, I would like to thank you very much for having included us at the scientific program and to open this discussion with all of you, because we always speak to other patients, to policymakers, to the society in general, but we also need to be heard by you, by the science. Then this was the definitive step, and it will be again. And since then, I've seen that science has progressed so much. You have done so well in those 18 years. You have researched so well. We have gone from triptans to this super good CGRP therapy. We have evolved in such a good way. But what about the social perception and political perception? We haven't changed at all. We are exactly at the same point that we were 18 years ago. We are questioned every single day, and nobody believes that that migraine is an important disease and it needs to be tackled and researched and so on. Let me tell you about another experience. When I started, I went to a hotel, a very well-known hotel in Madrid. I knew the director, and I said to her, do you lend me your hotel, a room in your hotel to organize a public day, please? And she said to me, oh, Elena, if you were the president of the Cancer Association, I will put you a red carpet here. But migraine, how do I sell migraine to my bosses? That's impossible. I cannot organize a migraine public day here, not here. And she didn't lend it to me. And then I thought, well, that's not going to be as easy as I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to solve all the migraine problem in 6 months. But no, this is 18 years ago, and I haven't solved anything yet. We are moving forward, but it's being difficult. Then I had a radio interview. At that moment, I had many radio interviews. In one of them, they asked me if I was the new hangover president association. I felt like the 5 minutes saying, not hangover, migraine. Don't you understand the difference between a hangover and a migraine? And they were, no, laughing at that, and migraine, oh, so is that you have when you don't want to at night? And I was, what is this? They all make fun at this. Then I came, and of course I had my speech there. I said, no, migraine is a very disabling condition. It's the second one by WHO, so on. I told that on the radio every time. And that day I had to go to have lunch with my mother, and I went. My mother is also a very severe migraine, and when I got to her house, she opened the door, looked at me, and said, how many times more are you going to say that you are a disabled person? Do you see me as a disabled person? Do you think you can say that all the migraines are disabled? Or this is a disabled neurological condition? And I thought about that. I said, well, it is true. I am not a disabled person, but I'm being more and more stigmatized, and people is more and more stigmatized because of this way of speaking. We have had this experience and so many others that I could tell you in those 18 years. I'm going just to go into my last experience only 2 weeks ago. I had to come here to this Congress. I mean, sometimes in a weak moment, so I was in a weak moment, I was having some migraines and headaches, and I decided to go to my GP in Valencia, and I went there and I said, you know, I need you to refer me to the neurologist because I need to get the new CGRP, the new treatment for migraine. And she looked at me and said, is there anything new for migraine? I said, oh my God, there is I'm going to write it down, so please give me a paper. I wrote everything down in a paper. And she said, is it a monoclonal then? And I said, yeah, it's a monoclonal CGRP therapy. Oh, it must be very expensive. And I said, it depends if you compare it with the life of a person or if you compare it with an aspirin. It depends. But how much do you think that it will cost? And I said, I have no idea. So I said, more or less 300 euros. And she said, oh, no way. You will never get that. There is no healthcare system that can afford to pay that just for migraine. You know how many people with migraine we have in the street? No, that's not going to be possible. So I put you here in this list for next year. You will be seen within 1 year. And I said, okay. Thank goodness I know all of you here, and I can complain here. Then, that was if am I a disabled person? That's about the GP. And this is my concern. Nowadays, and I thought about dyslexia because I think it's a neurological disorder too. Nowadays we have in a school, in a classroom, two tables, one with a child, with a kid with dyslexia, and at the table by, one child with migraine. In the last 10 years, dyslexia has been super well recognized, respected. Everybody respects dyslexia, everybody knows them, we all know what happens with them. Even they are adults now, some people are adults now, and they are proud to be dyslexic, and they tell you, don't speak to me so fast, don't write this down so fast because I'm a dyslexic one. And we understand it. They are the dyslexic people, or the people with dyslexia in schools, they have support, they have extra lessons, they have attention. And at the table, just by a kid with migraine has no support, and they only question her whether she is putting an excuse, or she or him, whether he or she is putting an excuse not to go to the next exam, or not to go to class, or not to go outside, and he or she they have to hide it. We are on the 21st century. What's this? What does it mean? What's such a big difference for children, but also for adults. So you all know, because that's why you are the science here, that there is a big, huge spectrum inside migraine. We have some people that they function very well. They only have 2 attacks per year, 3 attacks, 4 attacks per year, but they can have them under control. They function. And on the other side, we have those ones that are so crippled by their migraines, by daily attacks. Those ones are the ones that are more stigmatized. But nobody sees them because most probably they are at home, they're hidden, they have no energy, they cannot go out. The only way we hear about migraine is by those ones that are not so severe and that they are on the street and they say, yes, I suffer migraine, but that's not too bad. Among ourselves, the non-severe ones and the very severe ones and the less severe ones, there is also stigma. Because the ones that are not very severe, they say that it's not so bad, or it's not so, you don't complain so much, because it's because you have a low threshold, or you are very weak, and they make us guilty also. We all will improve if that improves, if this situation improves. And here's my proposal to you today. You, the scientific community, refer to migraine, to the most severe ones of migraine, as chronic, resilient, refractory, non-responders. Again, one word that is a difficult one. When I speak to an MEP, a policymaker, and I say migraine is a chronic disease, and there's a group of people that is very severe and they are very bad, and they get chronified, and they always ask me, but is it chronic or they gonna get chronified? The chronic word is a tricky one, and it's a difficult one to explain when we speak about migraine. It's not very well, when we speak about resilient, refractory, non-responder, it's not very well understood. My idea is that perhaps it's time to come to a change with the language and look for better words to define migraine and the different types of migraine inside the spectrum. And my proposal is, why don't we speak to the society in general and to the policymakers as mild, moderate, or severe, which are much easier to understand. When I look at any other disease, if I meet anyone with diabetes or Parkinson or whatever, I don't know whether they are refractory or difficult or severe or not. I only know if they are very advanced or not advanced. I don't need to know, the society in general don't need to know so many details on that. I think that this lack of understanding about what migraine is and how we speak about migraine is creating even more stigma to the next generations. Because the mildest ones, they don't want to be seen as disabled people, not even patients. This is a very difficult word for them. We really need to change perception. I don't know, I'm lost with that. I cannot do everything. We need to increase awareness, and we need to fight against this stigma, and we need to really make people understand that migraine is an important disease, and those very severe ones are the ones that are more stigmatized because of the result of all this wording. But we need to work together, all of us, to change the language, to use the language, and to get to a better moment on this social field. The society in general is not understanding us, nothing has changed, and if we don't change anything, nothing will be changed in the future. So science is doing great, but if we don't change anything now, nothing will be changed in the future around stigma and perceptions. And perceptions are very, very, very important. But let me tell you something I wrote here before, is that I am really convinced that language is a very powerful tool, a very powerful tool. It's not, you don't hear the same thing if I say that there is a climate change than if I say that it's a global heating. And it's exactly the same. But people react much better when you say, or react actively when you say that there is a global heating at this moment with all those consequences. So, and we are saying the same. I leave it here. I'm going to leave the floor to Usman, who is our facilitator, Usman Khan, who is our facilitator today. I know this is a difficult or new discussion. I invite Professor Marcelletti to come up, but I don't know where. You can come up with your chair. No? You want to stay there? You are part of the panel. And Usman, I leave you the floor because you are going to facilitate and coordinate the discussion about this. I just settle the scene. No, this you don't need that.
That's perfect, Elena.
Thank you.
To hear that passion and that energy behind the issue of stigma, I think it's really telling. I'll just very briefly introduce myself. I'm Usman Khan. I'm a visiting professor at KU Leuven and former executive director of the European Patients Forum. So I have a couple of sort of lines on this. And it's interesting when Elena reached out and said, well, I come and do a little bit of moderating. It was the third instance in probably 6 weeks where different condition groups had said, can you come and work with us about the issue of stigma and discrimination? Others being multiple sclerosis, also motor neurone disease, and I've worked for a long time on AIDS, HIV. So isn't it interesting that Elena is picking up on something, and I think the community around migraines and headache are picking up on this issue of stigma. But I think the question that we have today, and we have a fantastic panel representing industry, academic side, very much the lived experience of patients. So we've got all those experiences to be able to answer this question. I think we've posed the question. You saw it in the presentation. Is stigma an issue? And I think we probably already know the answer. But I don't know if we know how we end it. And one of the issues that Elaine was talking about was about language. But it would be interesting to say, I'm going to, maybe I'll introduce you and then ask questions if that's all right. Pinar Kokturk, you're from Teva.
Yes.
And we were just talking, it's coincidentally just talking before we started the panel, and I'm going to tee you up because you were talking about reframing. So tell us a little bit about what you think about how we can address the issue of stigma.
Thank you very much. I think disease reframing is much needed in the area of migraine. And in the past, we have I'm from Turkey, and in my country, autistic children are not called autistic anymore, because that is a little bit harsh language to call someone autistic. They are called special children. And special has a very positive connotation in Turkish language, like a God give you a gift. So this changed the perception of the society to the disease and created empathy, compassion, and deep understanding of the patients and their family's situation. I think disease framing is something very important for us to discuss today. Thank you.
It's fantastic to hear that, and I think that really marries with what you were saying, Elena. Let me just come back and say, so what a particular instance that you think could be reframed? We just talked about that issue of the language that describes severity within it. Are there other aspects that you could immediately think of?
I also think we need to educate the society in the spectrum of the disease, because when we talk about migraine, it looks like a uniform disease. And when we say there is 1 billion patients, it looks a little bit normalizes, like everybody has the migraine. So I would propose to have a spectrum definition and really teach the society, because society is the starting point of the stigma. If we are able to teach the society and make them really understand, for example, what is a chronic migraine, what is the true burden of the chronic migraine, people maybe would be scared to have chronic migraine, just like people are scared to have cancer, or they feel blessed that they don't have this disease.
So that sounds like it's bringing that lived experience out and giving those examples so people can really understand what, at that severe level, what migraine means. That links perfectly. Elena Gross, who is a patient representative but also has professional sort of oversight of this. You were, again, when we were talking, you were talking about your own sort of personal journey as a patient. So how does this, in terms of reframing, does that resonate with you?
Yes, I think it does. So my first experience with migraine actually was when I was around 5, and the German-speaking people around you may know the children movie Pünktchen and Anton. It's where the protagonist's mother actually has migraine, and the protagonist asks the father, "What is migraine?" And he says, "Migraine is a headache that doesn't exist." So for the next decades, I watched this movie literally over and over. So I thought the definition of the word migraine is faking a headache or a headache that doesn't exist, until I eventually suffered from it myself and realized it's very real. But this whole idea that it's only women that have it, and maybe if they're lazy or whatever, they're saying they have a migraine is this excuse, this psychological issue. I think in Germany it's still characterized as a psychological disease, even in some of the classifications. I think all of this needs to change, and I was wondering, as a patient myself, why is there this set of negative beliefs or unfair beliefs in society about something such as a condition? And I think it's mostly if you either haven't had any experience with the problem or the issue, but also if you don't have much exposure or knowledge or understanding of an issue. And the big problem is that if there is a stigma around a condition, the amount of efforts, research efforts, and support and resources that condition gets are limited, such as in migraine. So it's kind of a vicious circle. In order to break the stigma, you need to bring understanding out to the masses, and bring understanding out requires a lot of resources. So this is, I think, where also pharma comes in and has done a lot in the last 5 or so years. From my personal experience, when I talk about my condition, it's changed drastically in the last 5 years, just from advertisements about migraine being on television, people having heard about migraine. Still not that reframing still needs to happen at some point, but just getting exposure is already a huge part of the equation of solving stigma, is people realizing that's there, and that person looks sick on television, even though I may not look sick all the time. So I think that helps. I think it's one step, exposure, and then the understanding and the reframing, as you said. But there's, I think, several steps one needs to take in order to get rid of the stigma. And then, but I think what is very important is that vicious circle, the chicken and egg problem. If there's stigma, it's very hard to get rid of stigma, and that's probably why, as Elena said, it's not as much has changed in the last 2 decades because of that problem of the vicious circle.
And you really bring that to life. I think I certainly personally can understand it in a different way just by you sharing that lived experience. But you're doing that within a safe space. You have colleagues here who all understand it and all know it. But as you say, when you step out of that space, that's where it takes the courage to be able to keep going with the lived experience until it's heard. And there's certainly learning. If we look, we know that with the AIDS, HIV, with the gay community, of the challenges that they had, not just over months or years, but over decades, to be able to break through that. And there still are those significant challenges. But that reinforcement, absolutely, that if you aren't able to break out, then you just get reinforcement in terms of the negativity, I think, is something. So there feels like there's something about a campaign to break out, so people really, really do understand it.
And especially as a child, right? When nobody believes you, you've got something serious and everybody just thinks you're faking it, or you're not wanting to attend the party and then you're not invited anymore because people think you have just a headache and you don't really want to come. So yeah, as an adult, it's easier.
Yeah, and that narrative, breaking that narrative, the reframing. So we're beginning to get something. So Dr. Anja Otzka, so from again, your own perspective, we're getting these different perspectives on the idea of stigma. So how have you, maybe just give a sort of timeline of, have you always viewed stigma around migraines in the same way, or has it evolved? And if it has, what's made for those changes?
Yeah, actually, in my opinion, there is 2 points we need to care about. The first one, in migraine cases doesn't have any biomarkers. For this reason, actually, the cases don't have a clearly biomarker. For example, like diabetes, you cannot show that the blood sugar is the 400 milligram, for example. You cannot show. This is a very important point. Why? Because the other person couldn't imagine that, what happened inside the brain, what happened inside the life. This is very important. For example, an employer asks an absenteeism in the company because of the, for example, unstable angina. Everybody make a big empathy to the person, and they give lots of the opportunities to helping them. Otherwise, an employer, and the same employer, say that I have a migraine attack, I need to take a gap today. I think there is not the same empathy and the same understanding and same problem. This is the one aspect. Another aspect is, my opinion, migraine is not just a headache. Migraine is not just that. We need to care about the more complex issue together with the headache attack. For example, comorbidities, for example, other triggers. And on the other hand, maybe we, as a researcher,
and it feels like, oh, you know, you have either a perfect storm or a wicked problem or whatever the framing is, that this is a particularly challenging thing to deal with. But I think what I'm also hearing, what would be helpful, you're just going to go down. I was going to just say to Professor Marat, if you would like to, please do come. I think what would be interesting to get further thoughts on, and then if people have got any further comments or questions to have, but I think where we're trying to get to for the end of the day, if I'm right, Elena, is really to be able to see if there's something that can be done, a piece of work that needs to be done. I think, did you want to come in on that point? Or?
Yeah.
Please, Professor Lampel.
Can we a little bit distinguish between what we are talking about? We're talking about stigma. Can you please define stigma for me?
I mean, there are a number of definitions of stigma, because stigma is something that is felt by the individual. You feel stigmatized, and there's the self part of it, but then you can be stigmatized. So in terms of the two parts of it, and this really came, there's a good literature around it, as I say, AIDS, HIV, where it was. And if you find yourself stigmatized, there's a whole series of behaviors that you might exhibit as a result of it. But equally, you'll find that you're being stigmatized by your friends at school or other people. So it's a view, it's a mindset that can come from outside and it can come from inside. That's my...
Yes, unfairly discrediting people. Yeah.
So now we have clarified what is meant. The next stage is, what is the headache community talking about? The headache community is talking about burden. And in my opinion, burden has nothing to do with stigma. That's my opinion. And burden, when we talk about that, we're talking about the ictal burden, we talk about the interictal burden, we talk about the pill burden, we talk about all that. I think that's fair and necessary to talk about these issues, to prevent stigmatization. When we don't talk about that, about the burden, we can't talk about how we can, let me say, protect these people from stigmatization. And that's one part of our research that we daily do. That's the part was in all the communication that we will do with our patients. That's what we do with patients' organizations. And that's why we talk about that. The whole community, the people outside, the politicians, the healthcare providers, then that we realize that people with headache, I don't want to talk about migraine, people with headache cannot be or should not be stigmatized. The other thing is we should be aware that, and this is a little bit probably dangerous when we compare one disease with another disease. You mentioned HIV very often. I think this could be a little bit dangerous when we compare stigmatization of IGV people with stigmatization of headache people. You may agree, you may don't agree. And that's my personal opinion. And I'm here as a clinician. I'm not here as the president of the European Headache Federation. I'm here as a migraine sufferer with aura. That is, my condition is rare. In my family, my daughters, my wife, are migraineurs. And I talked to her before we discussed about the topic of this. And they said, no, I don't feel stigmatized anyway.
I think it's really helpful. We've been able to sort of, I think it was very helpful, thank you, in terms of being able to obviously work with clear definitions of both stigma and discrimination. I think it's important to do that. I think, you know, the points that you raised, what it feels to me is that the community is at a point where it could usefully spend some time looking at the issue. And I think it's on that basis. I just wanted to be able to see if there's some points out in the audience. Would anyone like to question or comment? We have a... Let's I think it's...
Peter, go to the mic.
I can't.
We've got a mic. Oh, he's going to come up to the mic.
Yeah, I'll tell you two things. Well, first, as a clinician scientist, let me say I think we should just apologise to the migraine community, to the patient community, because we've obviously been beating up the wrong path, and that's on us. And when we should just own that mistake in the way we've done it, and own it. It's a good start. The classification, which I'm now responsible for, I'm not sure we did any favours to anyone the way we did divided up episodic cramps, just made a mess, and we need to fix that. And your suggestion's a perfectly rational way to get started. So first, we have to accept that we got a lot of things wrong. Physicians sometimes have a bit of trouble accepting that, but I think we'll own that. The second thing is, of course, that stigma generally involves ignorance. Because if you know something, you'd have to be just plain stupid to apply stigma. So stigma is often ignorance, it's not I don't think people are evil, but they're just ignorant. So it seems to me like knowledge is always an enemy of ignorance. So I do think that the investment in understanding the condition relieves ignorance. And that will eventually help with a stigma. You don't think, maybe Ellen doesn't think so, but I think knowledge is important, and our ability to actually communicate that knowledge as we reframe the condition, because our understanding since your first picture with Pat Humphrey, I see there, who we owe a debt of gratitude for the triptans to, we've moved on a lot in understanding the condition, but I don't think we've taken the community with us terribly well, the neurology community or more broadly the community. So I think the exploitation of knowledge will be helpful for stigma. And the last thing to say is we have to absolutely do this in partnership with patient organisations. It's crazy for us as, experts, but not experts in the condition so much, but just experts in what we do, to think we could drive this without the patient community. Thanks.
Very, very helpful additional points. And I think I know we're getting close to 6 o'clock, but I don't know if is there anyone else who, please.
The lady there.
In the back. Yeah, I've got in the back as well.
Is this one live? Yeah. Hi, I'm Joanna Zakrzewska. I deal with trigeminal neuralgia, so a different ballpark. But we've been doing the same thing. And a word that comes up in our group is much more about isolation and being isolated. And I think even migraine patients can also say they get isolated and things, and that's got a different connotation to it. And what we have just finished doing, I've had a PhD student, is working on what outcomes are important. We've had focus groups with patients. We've had over 28 patients joining focus groups. Then we've had experts joining a Delphi study, and we've had consensus meetings together. And what has come out is very rich data about what is important to patients and clinicians, and we've unified that. And I think migraine needs to do a little bit more on that, and much more, I feel, on the psychosocial aspect that is missing. I mean, the fact that people cannot work that day or 2 days, and there is a huge impact on quality of life. And I don't think that's brought out well enough scientifically. We've got a lot of measures, and I think more should be done about looking at the impact on quality of life.
Which very much then, and if you're able to do that, you're able to then move into the policy arena, the health policy arena, and be able to have some conversations about impact. Very apologies at the back.
Yeah, that's okay. Olena Rudneva, I wanted to ask, I never realized that there is this stigmatization, so I never sensed it before. I'm working in clinical trials, so I'm wondering, I have a question to the physician probably here. Do you think that this actually impacts recruitment to clinical trials? The patient feeling stigmatized, they don't want to accept the disease and don't want to go to clinical trials?
Who would like to?
Did I catch you right that you say bisexual won't go into clinical trials?
No, it's whether patients stigmatized and therefore won't go put themselves forward for clinical trials because they, again, this idea of that they're stigmatizing themselves.
But I didn't catch it.
I'll just say something quick because I've worked in clinical trials before as well. I think in a clinical trial setting, you are amongst your peers, right? It's all migraineurs enrolled in the trial, so it's more a place where you can freely share you have migraine and you find somebody else who has the same condition as you. So I would say no, because you don't have to openly talk about having migraine very, very much if you are enrolled in a clinical trial. That's why I think probably not.
Patients usually don't interact with each other. Before enrolling into clinical trial, patients need to know the diagnosis, go to doctors, seek for treatment, and usually patients who feel stigmatized may not do so easily.
I think, again, what you've done is, again, in terms of opening this framing, and what I would say is that where I've done work around looking at stigma and discrimination, when you do studies, you find domains that you didn't think you didn't think would have been impacted by stigma or discrimination, which are. You may find some which aren't, but it generally widens rather than narrows. So that would be another thing that I think, as part of a wider review of stigma within migraine and headache, would be able to consider that. Professor sorry.
In the past years, we have executed various different clinical trials in migraine area, and we didn't observe this as a barrier for recruitment. So I don't think this is a barrier.
I think we've got to, please.
I would like to add a contribute from my point of view.
been invited as editor of a journal, but this is not the proper way, in my opinion, to approach the word stigma. If compared with other diseases, stigma of chronic migraine is nothing. If compared, it's not a deadly disease. If compared with the daily activities, with the functioning, is enormous. But we didn't reach until today the politician, the healthcare professional, because in this Congress, this is not a criticism, this is a fact. There is not a session dedicated to public health. And in the journal dedicated to public health, migraine is underestimated. We have to put attention on the basis of publication. We live in the century of data. With the data, you can organize an international press launch. You can come to the European Parliament. You can arrange a social law defining chronic headaches as social disease. This happened in Italy 2 years ago, but after that, no money have been devoted to the law, so it's completely unuseful. So I encourage the scientists present here to publish not exclusively on drugs, on PLS 001, but to dedicate sometimes some protocols on this kind of aspects. Otherwise, we'll continue to publish in the top journal, trying to reach the best impact factor, the most citation paper, and avoid the cultural dilemma. Migraine is a real disease. Now, in this room, we are aware that it's a real disease. But in external situation, in the work area, in the school, into the family.
Let me tell you that
and
we have been going...
I discussed with Elena about an unsolicited request from a journal, Neurology and Therapy, nothing special, but we had to publish not exclusively for our own age index, but in favor of patient. And we will arrange a paper on a thematic series, namely patient and physician perspective. The patient tells about the stigma, tells about the problems, the daily problem, and the physician will report how he is able to face and not to solve, because sometimes to face the problem do not mean to solve the problem.
That sounds like I'm going to come back to you, Elena, and add it back. I do, apologies again, we're back. I think we'll probably take that as the last comment, if that's all right, because I know there's a social event that people will be looking to get to as well.
Okay. Good evening. So, first of all, I'm really delighted that this topic found its place at this conference. I'm just wondering, here are mostly neurologists, right? So, my question is, how many people attending this lecture in this room, to be more precise, do themselves suffer from migraines or know someone very closely related to them? Wow. I wouldn't say that I'm not surprised. Yes, so we are all doctors, neurologists, and I have to say that at work as well, among colleagues, we do not have the safe space, what you mentioned earlier, because we are getting stigmatized at work, at the neurology department as well. So I think the problem goes out from our department, from our colleagues, and this is where we have to work, because we see so many patients with migraines. They come to the emergency room. I'm sure that they are not coming there because they have the best day of their lives. So I think this is the first place where we have to start with the destigmatization, right? Thank you.
I think that sounds like a highly appropriate way to be able to, for me to hand back to Elena, but certainly from what I'm hearing, certainly the issue of being able to get the definitions right in terms of being able to get that reframing, the connection between evidence and the lived experience, there seems to be plenty of scope. It's fantastic if Britta Martinetti is looking at this idea of having a series looking at the patient versus the clinical views. It feels like that space there, but I'm going to hand back over to you now, Elena.
Yeah, well, because I wanted to add something. When I talk about stigma, and I understand that someone that's at home and a young person with a neurologist father is not stigmatized. I can understand that. When you advocate for migraine, you face the reality. We have been at the European Parliament twice a year at least. I can't remember once that I was sitting in a round table, in a lunch. It was a lunch conference, and an MEP came, sat by me, and said to me, "What is this about today? What is this meeting about today?" And I said, "About migraine." And she said, "Oh, what a stupid topic." And she left. She stood up and left. Is that a stigma? I may know what a stigma is, but is that a stigma? One other thing that happens is that we need the population, the community with migraine to get mobilized. And we have this huge spectrum. The very severe ones cannot mobilize because they are at home, they are very severe, they are suffering, they have no energy, they haven't coped with the situation. And the mild ones, they are not going to fight for migraine because they don't want to even hear talk about migraine. And it is true that we need to say that it's a very severe condition, disabling, and very bad things to get grants from policymakers and so on. But my point is, do we need to tackle it or to change the way we speak about it, to make it easier to understand to the society in general, and to the media, and to add those words like mild, moderate, and severe, for instance, which are very simple to everybody to understand. And nowadays, that we have generalized migraine, the mildest one don't want to be seen as they are intimidating by the words disabling, neurological disease, or even patients. They don't want to be called patients. I meet people now that I know they have migraine, that they have been consulting many people and talking to me about this. And now they say to me, especially one friend, she said to me, "You know, Elena, I don't have the same thing you have. Mine is just a jaqueca. It's not a migraine, as you say, disabling and so on. I can function very well, or I can cope with it, I can manage." And it is true that we have been fighting for the last 18 years to be recognized, to get the respect from the society, from the policymakers, and we haven't succeeded nothing at all. We haven't moved a thread there. We need to change, to do some changes. My proposal is just to open the box, and it's just a proposal. It could work, and we need to work more about this, of course, but it's a real truth that the ones that advocate for migraine, we find in front of us this regret from the group of people that we are talking to. It doesn't matter whether it's policymakers or a group in the society or I don't know. But really we need, and this is something that everybody says, I've lost jobs because of my migraine. We have some data. We have a lot of data, Professor Martelletti, a lot of data. We have done some surveys. Still, last year, 11% of the respondents of one of our surveys were fired of their jobs because they suffer migraine. That's not bearable at this moment. So, are we on time already?
I think we're over time by about 11 minutes, so I think it's probably time to be able to wrap it up. Was there anything else that anyone on the panel wanted to? Please.
Actually, an important point is the damage relationship between the patients and the physicians. Why? Because, for example, in my outpatient department, if there are outside to the door, there are dozens of the cases. And if a cases come to me in my office with the complaining several types of the headache disorders and a very negative approach, and they have several comorbidities, it is not a good idea for the patients and for the physicians. And in our medical school education, we don't give enough performance to our physicians to manage this issue. And also in the neurology residency, we don't give an approach they understood what happens in the brain of the cases. In that time, sometimes the physician think about that. This is an unsatisfactory and negativistic and very problematic cases. This is the stopping rule of the approach in the first step. The stopping. For this reason, we need to start healing of the damage relationship between the patients and the physicians, the first step. And then patients have to know my physician accept me with my damage. And otherwise, the physician have to know that my patients understand my opinion with a holistic approach. Otherwise, you cannot manage anything. For example, I don't know, there is an animal model in the laboratory. They have make clear the effect of the mobbing in the home or the job. Is there any animal model? Reveal that, but in our mobbing in the job or the home. But we know that every day, lots of the cases, they have the mobbing and the chronicity, increase the complications. And the other things, migraine is not just the headache. For this reason, having the allergic reaction or the several comorbidities is the same origin, and I have to manage all of them all together. If I accept as a physician this reality, it's okay. Otherwise, everybody is judge each other, and lots of the cases also lost the belief they can manage with the realistic approach in the current science. It's my opinion.
And I'll encapsulate it in a sense. Did you want to say something further, Elaine? Or no? I think it encapsulates in the sense that when you've said, as a clinician, this should be a partnership between clinicians and patients and clinicians to be able to understand what stigma is, what's it involved with, what's its impact levels, and then moving on, what can be done about it.
So yeah, at this point, what I'm going to propose is that we can, this is just the opening moment of this topic. We need to tackle it. We need to work a little bit more on that. So what I would propose is to start to create a multidisciplinary group with your societies, the scientific societies and the patients, and start working and create a survey, gather some data from patients with the stigma, and launch the result next year at EHF. In Valencia, it could be a good situation. Yeah, do you have the micro? No, Elena, pass it to Maria Antoniette, please. I think that could be a good starting point.
Yeah, and I would like, it's a bit reiterating Peter Goatsby's word, but I think he said something very crucial, that if you have a lack of knowledge, you may be stigmatizing. So I think, educating society is very important.
It is.
And we should work on that together.
Yeah, sure, great. Elena, you wanted to say something else?
I just wanted to add to the last point that for me, migraine, the presence of pain and all the other symptoms was terrible, but the worst was migraine in a severe form is absence of life. And without life in a life, it's really not worth living. And I think that's what society needs to also understand. It's not the presence of all the terrible symptoms, but it's the absence of the life that you're not living and the experience you're not making in the best years of your life.
But society doesn't know that. Please, Professor.
That's fully clear. But again, my purpose is we should find the link between, you said you don't want to talk about burden, but this is...
No, I didn't say that. I want to talk about everything. Also about
this is clearly burden. This is clearly burden of the disease, and we should find the link between the burden, and we should discuss, and we have to discuss the burden of the disease interictally, ictally, and so on. And we should find the link between education. We always say we have to educate our patients. We don't have exclusively educate the colleagues, the doctors. We have also to educate the patients. And we have to find the link between understanding the burden and to destigmatize this patient. Otherwise, we will fail. We can't talk about the burden of the disease. This is an issue. We have to talk about that. And that is what we discussed in prior. Do we need this burden to fully understand the disease, to fully understand what patients' preference, what patient needs are, what needs of pharmaceutical companies are? Do we need that? And my answer is yes, we need that to destigmatize those patients.
But also not only educate the patients, but especially the non-patients. Yeah. Because the patients know it's bad, right?
Absolutely, yeah. This is information.
It goes back to that whole idea. It's the reframing, and it's about knowledge, and it's about information, and there's obviously a need for it.
Okay, so let's wrap up. Thank you very much for being here today. Let's start working on this for this year. Thanks for your contributions. Thanks for your time. And, well, next year we will have a little bit more done. And then I invite you to participate in that scientific roundtable. Thanks to EHF and to you too for this time.